Welcome to the College Essay Advisors podcast. Before we introduce ourselves, here's a little preview of what's to come.
Math and music are not so dissimilar, right? I grew up playing
Right.
violin. My dad was a calculus professor. We would butt heads over the kitchen table trying to solve word problems. And it wasn't until later I realized that I took the mathematical part of my brain and applied it to music. So we actually were then able to have sort of conversations that made more sense together. So I guess what I'm trying to
Completely.
say is that if you're like, oh, I haven't done anything creative, you have just by virtue of working through equations. And we're here to, we'll help you figure it out.
Welcome to the College Essay Advisors podcast, an ongoing exploration of how to write admissions essays that get you noticed and accepted. Hi, my name is Stacey Brooke, and I am the founder and chief advisor at College Essay Advisors.
Hi, my name is Becca Myers, and I am Director of Advising at College Essay Advisors.
And today we're going to talk about how to write college essays as a STEM applicant. We hear from a lot of STEM applicants who are looking for advice on how to write their admissions essays. And part of that is because sometimes STEM students don't feel as confident in their writing abilities. So, we hear from people who just are not quite as secure in their feelings about writing college admissions essays and want advice for that reason. I also think that because STEM fields are so competitive and because a lot of the STEM programs are so specialized, STEM students are particularly worried about differentiating themselves from other applicants in their programs. So in this conversation, Becca and I we're going to talk a little bit about both what STEM students can do to enhance their own natural writing abilities, whether you believe you have them or not, and also what you can do to ensure that your application actually does stand out from other applicants that might have similar experience. Okay, so when it comes to the actual task at hand of writing the college essay and how students who might be stronger in the math science areas feel about it. I think, a lot of students that come to us, they have a lack of confidence in that area, or they're worried they won't be able to, to execute an essay as well as they would like to. And we are here to say that you absolutely can. And one thing that I think is constantly underestimated among STEM students is the amount of creativity it actually takes to be an incredible mathematician, to be, someone who understands and can apply the sciences. So many of the people we work with actually do have a variety of creative instincts. They just don't think of them as under that creative umbrella. So, part of our mission is to show people that they do have these multifaceted personalities, skills, talents. And all it takes is one interesting idea to get the ball rolling. So I really do believe that STEM students, even the ones that don't love to write, can conjure pretty incredible essays that say things that are unexpected, thoughtful, enlightening, reflective, etc.
I also think the playing field is fairly even because even your history and English applicants often are unfamiliar with this particular
It's true.
exercise, which is
Yes.
a first person creative nonfiction, both bragging and also holding back and showing some degree of, you know, restraint over bravado. So it is very unfamiliar to even students that are writing term papers
So
about
true.
Anna Karenina, right? So,
hmm
so if that's helpful for any of our STEM applicant listeners or parents out there to be realizing that everyone is approaching this and with like fresh eyes, and
Completely.
like Stacey said, discovering through what your interests and your talents are, discovering the creative through line in that, like
hmm
mathematicians. Math and
hmm
music are not so dissimilar, right? I grew up
Right.
playing violin. My dad was a calculus professor. We would butt heads over the kitchen table trying to solve word problems. And it wasn't until later I realized that I took the mathematical part of my brain and applied it to music. So
hmm
we actually were then able to have sort of conversations that made more sense together. So I guess what I'm trying to
Completely.
say is that if you're like, oh, I haven't done anything creative, you have just by virtue of working through equations, and we're here to, we'll help you figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too is that it doesn't, this assignment, these assignments, the college essays, do not require this like florid language, like high level of vocabulary, this sort of, in fact, we discourage this kind of overwriting of your essay. There's a much more conversational voice that's expected in this, and that's, I think, effective in the writing of the personal statement and the school specific supplements. So I think if students can tap into their more conversational voice, which again, they don't have a ton of practice doing. But if they can tap into a sort of more direct and relaxed form of writing, all they need to do is come up with an interesting concept, an interesting idea, and then write the way they think. And a beautiful essay will come out of that. I think there's a lot to be said for, coming up with an interesting metaphor, finding disparate areas of your life that connect, finding a story, that's very specific to you and only you, identifying, a smaller story within a larger story where you can reveal details that showcase who you are. Once you find your approach, and sort of solidify that, I think the writing, the actual writing piece of it is much more direct, clear, and and casual, more casual just in terms of tone than anyone thinks. And I think that ultimately ends up being actually much easier
Yeah, agreed.
for students. I mean, I also think some STEM students sometimes, and these are massive generalizations, but I think if you're used to writing, term papers, you're used to writing research abstracts, other things, maybe your writing is a little bit more technical, but I think leaning into like a kind of letter writing voice, which is something, or an email writing voice, which is something that everybody has experience with, and just loosening up a little bit, but then telling your story directly is a totally effective way to get a great essay on the page.
Yeah, I think that helping students brainstorm through imagining audience is really useful too, to tell
Hmm.
students, like you said, don't think of this as a really formal academic exercise where you can't use contractions. That's one of the things a lot of students will
Right.
say to me is like, you've used
Yeah.
I'm instead of I am. I'm like, well, do
Hmm.
you talk to your friends and say, I am hungry? You say, I'm
Right.
hungry, right?
Right.
So
Right.
to tell them, like, imagine you're writing an email to a friend, at least an initial draft, and kind of get that more conversational language, which most likely
Hmm.
doesn't use the word florid, right? So we're
Hmm.
trying to really get at how you normally talk so they get a sense of your
Yes.
personality, which I think brings us, okay, to the second point too, which is about
Yes.
differentiation
Yes.
and thinking about, okay, it's true that most STEM applicants are going to bring a similar background to that application in terms of like maybe some robotics teamwork or like maybe a coding class. What we need to think about is not necessarily shying away from that completely in the essays. I wouldn't say don't mention that at all. If your school just has like one, the one personal statement, I would say don't spend all of it talking about robotics. What we want to do, like Stacey was saying, is think about connections. Think about how maybe there's something else in your life that you apply that robotics mindset to. Maybe it's something you do with your family, or maybe it's like the fact that you play the trumpet, like ways that we can
Um,
tie the STEM skill set to other areas of your life.
and I think for most of the highly competitive STEM programs, be they in engineering or mathematics or wide range of fields, obviously, um, oftentimes you'll have a personal statement and also a school specific supplement that gives you space to elaborate on what you have done outside of your classroom time to pursue the field that you want to go into. And I think perhaps more so than others, certainly more so than, let's say, literature or history. I think fields like engineering, computer science, those are fields where I think there is a degree of expectation by admissions that you have some kind of outside curiosity, some motivation to move a project forward on your own, do some research. And since I think they know that the students that are being attracted to these top level programs have those kinds of experiences, they want to give you space to discuss those in more detail. There's also the activity section where you'll be able to list them. Schools are also going to get letters of recommendation potentially from, research guides or mentors, science teachers, other things that will help illuminate these skills. So I think in all likelihood, you'll have space in the supplements, which leaves the opportunity in your personal statement to talk about something that's potentially more humanizing. Not that STEM dehumanizes you in terms of, your focus and what it means about you as a human, but I think it gives you the opportunity not just to talk about the things you do, but about who you are.
And there's ways, like, it's really important not to just reiterate the activity section. We want to create a well-rounded version of you, and we want to reveal things in these essays that aren't necessarily apparent anywhere else on the application. And
Yes.
one of the things I really like to work with students is to think about jobs they've had or ways that they've applied hard work outside of school. So
Mm-hmm.
this is just an example that came to my head. Let's say that you've worked part-time at Chipotle for 4 years and you want to be an engineer. How interesting to think about the ways that you engineer a bowl. How do you, I marvel at how people can wrap those burritos. Like, you must think about structure, right?
Right.
You're working under pressure. You've got to think about like what goes first. I just think it's a really interesting application of more academic, highbrow
Mm-hmm.
principles, because a lot of students would say, oh, I don't want to write about that. That's not smart enough. But I
Mm-hmm.
think what it's showing is that you're also a person who exists in the real world, that you're able to take what you're learning from a textbook and you're able to sort of do it in front of other people and in a real hands-on, interesting way, right? We also
Mm-hmm.
want you to stand
Yeah.
out with while still reminding the reader of what your ultimate goal is and your interests are.
Also, maybe you have like a managerial role in this imaginary Chipotle position we're talking about, and maybe your responsibilities are split between figuring out how to, if you're like if you're in charge of drive-through, let's say, like how do you as an individual ensure that your process is well honed enough to like sling burritos out that window all day long every day, and also negotiate with and collaborate with the rest of the team to ensure like when you need things, they're ready. You would want to express things that are outside of the realm of just hard academic skills, the softer skills, the people skills, also your internal motivation, the way you think about things. Are you a planner? Are you someone who does really well on the fly? Like how do you engage with the world? Not just what are your goals and what are you doing, but how will you be present in person on a college campus? Because admissions is when they're admitting you, they're basically voting to have you as a human being engage with all of the other people that they're admitting to their school. So they do
Mhm.
want someone who can can work with other people. They do want someone who's gonna be responsible enough to take some pressure off of, their teammates when or their research team when they are given a responsibility or other things along those lines. So I think anything you can include in the personal statement and in other supplements when it applies that gets a little more at the intangibles.
I have a lot of students that want to do AI right now. And this idea that there's a human behind that create the creation of that. You're still working, as Stacey said, with a team, right? You still have to have strong interpersonal skills, even though your ultimate goal is maybe to like automate things. How have you, if we go back to Chipotle, like how have you worked with other people, even as you're looking at ways that the system there is automated, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
has an assembly
Mm-hmm.
line structure? Like, in
Mm-hmm.
what ways are you still humanizing that experience and recognizing that, like, I can streamline this in this way, but here's why it's important to have conversations with people and remember that I'm like a person interacting with other people. I think that's super important for STEM.
And I think just one last note in terms of topic selection and how to approach especially the personal statement in a way that is distinguishing. Know that most of the people applying to, especially if you're applying to a highly specific STEM-oriented program, like a very well-known engineering program, et cetera, that the students you're competing against, the applicants you're competing against, will have a lot of the same kinds of experiences that you have. That doesn't mean that you can't write about them in a way that that really accentuates what you do and why you might be a better fit for the school campus, you absolutely can. And that's something that you're going to work towards probably on your supplements. But is there a way for you to stand out in your personal statement through discussion of something else, literally anything else that isn't the robotics team, that isn't something that in all likelihood will appear on other people's personal statements? That personal statement is a really valuable place for you to be different from the other students that from the other essays that the admissions officer who's considering people for your program will see. So
Mm-hmm.
I think anything you can do to include variety in there. And again, as we've said, yes, some degree of STEMness might weave its way in there. That would be natural if that's what you're passionate about. But at the same time, can you talk about like your favorite trip you've ever taken and how that impacted you? Can you talk about like how you practice the piano every single day, even though nobody's telling you to, but it's a thing that relaxes you? And that might be very easily tieable into STEM.
Well, that's something that my son will never write. He's
Um,
10. I've never, ever had him just decide to practice on his own. So props to the parents listening to that who said, that's my kid.
As a person who stopped taking piano lessons after like 2 minutes, I understand.
It's never too late,
Um,
Stacey.
we love working with STEM students. If you feel like you're a STEM student still stuck, you're the parent of a STEM student who, wants some additional guidance for your child, give us a call. We're always happy to help people brainstorm. And we love working with students who have, I love working with students who have slightly more mathematical, scientific, engineering oriented brains. My brain does not work that way. So I find the thoughts, ideas, mechanics of those student brains to be so fascinating, and I think they're so creative. So if you need more help, we're always here, but we're definitely going to cover more STEM oriented content in the future because obviously these are very popular fields for people to be going into. The competition for these programs is fierce, and anything we can do to help give you some tips on how to make the process of applying less stressful, we shall do.
Also, we are not sponsored by Chipotle, but we would be. So
Let them know.
that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for listening or watching. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to follow us for more. Happy writing!